It's time that Western society brought back the nuthouses, the loony bins, the asylums, whatever you want to call them. I'm being purposely harsh in my title of this video and the way I'm talking, because what we have is a society that's killing people with kindness, because we've become so sensitive that we don't want to face the hard realities of what happens when somebody has a terminally incurable mental health problem. And we look the other way. We don't want to talk about it. We sweep it under the rug. And what has happened now is we have, throughout North America, throughout Europe, thousands and thousands and thousands of people on the streets who really must be in a secured mental health institution. Let's quit pretending that they can become functional on the streets where they are. They can have community living. I got inspired by this when driving the other day, and again, looking at the poor unfortunate people all over. Every major city has it so much, and that's tied into addiction, and I'll go into that as well. Addiction and mental health are very closely related. And I'm listening to a dingbat on the radio talking about that, with the homeless people on the streets saying it's because rents are too high, because housing's too expensive. How low does the rent have to get before the man pushing the shopping cart, who's lost bowel control and is yelling at the clouds, is going to just, oh, hey, I'll move into a place and become stabilized? Let's get real. How low is the rent going to have to get before the cluster of zombies on the corner, half bowed and crouched because they've been smoking fentanyl? $50 a month? $10 a month? These are people in no condition to take care of themselves, to maintain themselves. If rent was free, they still wouldn't do it, couldn't do it. You put them into a place, they're going to turn it into a drug den or leave it on their own anyways. They aren't in their right mind. It's not their fault. It's a disease. Addiction's a disease. Mental health breakdowns are diseases. But to sit and pretend that we can do anything other than put them somewhere for their own safety is only hurting them. We're seeing the results on the streets, and we just don't want to face that reality. It's a terrible thing to think of. To take somebody and have them in a secured facility when they haven't committed a crime. Taking somebody's liberty, not a minor thing. But leaving them out there to die isn't a good option either, and that's what's going to happen. Or they end up in a regular hospital, or they end up in jail. Is that better? Sleeping behind a dumpster? Mental health, we got to look at the history of the institutions. It was actually in the end of the 1800s. If you look at those big old mental health institutions, it was a trend at the end of the 1800s to build them as a mercy. So they all had that Victorian look. Unfortunately, as initially they were brought in as a compassionate way to care for people with mental health issues. As usual, as society and as governments go, it started to get abused. They got underfunded. That led to abuse in the institutions. Undesirables were put in there. People that they didn't know how to deal with any other way would be stuffed into these institutions when they really didn't belong there. But just because it was all done wrong then doesn't mean we have to stop doing it. It just means we have to do it right. A big thing that happened in the 1950s is really the peak of mental institutions, and we started the big deinstitutionalization trend. Started moving people out. It's because Thorazine came about, or the drug goes by other names, but it was an antipsychotic treatment that works really, really well. If a person's taking it, a lot of people who had psychosis were suddenly stable, were suddenly doing all right. I thought, great. When they let them out. The problem is they usually stop taking their medication when they go, and then the voices come back in their heads, and then things happen. Another part of what got me going, a recent issue in Calgary too, they're looking desperately for a person who put obstacles in a bike lane just out of the blue, and you can tell by the pictures. And yeah, I'm going to make an assumption. She's a mentally disturbed, addicted, homeless person who, for whatever reason, thought she'd put things out on a bike path where people move quickly. An 80-year-old man ran into the obstacle and died. That's the reminder to people as well, even if you don't care about the fate of the people on the streets, like you should. They're not harmless. How many times have we seen people pushed off of platforms? That's a weird thing they seem to do. They hang around train platforms and spontaneously push people in front of trains. Throughout North America, there seems like there's a couple of those stories every year. I understand the vast majority of homeless people are not going to attack others, but a much larger number of them will than your average person because they have serious mental health issues. And we can't cure them. That's part of what really drives people that the reality they don't want to face. I wish we could. We can treat a lot of disorders. Therapies, medications can help, but many of them are incurable. So why don't we face the reality that some people are going to have to be institutionalized for life, not in a punitive way. They don't have to be one flew over the cuckoo's nest style places with an emasculating nurse Ratched there. We can build relatively nice facilities. And people say, well, it's still imprisoning them. Well, maybe in a way, but how does it look when they're sleeping under a bush in winter in Canada? Is that better? When they're lined up outside of those shelters you see with the filth, is that better? I had a family member recently, and because we've closed all our facilities, there's just nowhere to put somebody. And within the last couple of years, I talked about it in past things on my shows at the Western Standard. He had a massive breakdown, completely incapable of taking care of himself, paranoid, delusional, out of his mind. And he still hasn't recovered to this day. He won't, unless some miracle cure comes along. But we had to sit for over 23 hours in the emergency room in the hospital because that's the entry point for somebody with a mental health breakdown. Family members kind of keeping him restrained, keeping him still till we get him in. And then he was in a hallway bed for another 23 hours after that, before somebody could get in. And the reason they determined he needs to be kept for mental health reasons, but the little mental health ward in the hospital was full. They had to wait to discharge one more person to bring him in. And I got into this underserved, temporary-looking mental health facility we had in that particular hospital. And it's a large hospital, and it could house about 40 people. And the goal, again, wasn't long-term housing. It was just transitional. But the problem is, if you can't cure them, why are you kicking them back out? Because we have nowhere else to put them. Why don't we have anywhere else to put them? Because like fools, we closed all of our long-term mental health institutions. Most of them now are, forensic ones, if somebody's really gone so badly that they're out there and dangerously hurting people. Or short-term stay ones, well, we'll bring them in for treatment for 30 to 90 days. And again, the waiting list for those treatment steps and periods in there, because another family member, it's been happening. A lot of people deal with it. We just don't like talking about it. Needed that. And you had to wait and wait and wait to get them in. So let's get on with it. It's going to cost some money. But guess what? It already does. How much do you think it costs to have the paramedics constantly out there resuscitating addicts? Or the people taking up beds in a regular general hospital when really they should be in a long-term mental health facility? So we could put others into the general hospital. We're paying anyways. How many are in jail? Well, we're paying massive amounts to keep them in a secured facility when they really belong in a mental health institution. It's a societal failing. What gets me is these self-imposed blinders where we think we're doing something good and are refusing to look around ourselves and face the hard reality that it's caused a socioeconomic catastrophe for a lot of people. Heavily addicted people as well. It's a mental health thing, as I said. They're closely associated. They do need a different kind of center. That's more treatable, potentially. But we need secured facilities readily available for addicts to get into or be placed into. And that's where it's gotten controversial. Even BC under David Eby with the NDP is saying it because BC is so out of control, even idiotic NDP premiers can figure it out. We have to actually take some people against their will and put them into treatment. And then there's other ass clowns that come out, oh, the success rates are terrible for that. Well, the success rate's zero if you leave them out in the street to die. Zero. So if you grab them, put them in, even if it's a 20% treatment success rate, it's about 18% higher than leaving them where they were when they're in that condition. We're not talking as well. People say, oh, they're going to snatch people up all over the place. Why would we do that? Why would we want to spend the money and grab somebody who is functional, who is getting by, and stick them into an expensive treatment center? We don't have to look that hard downtown unless you're an absolute imbecile to be able to distinguish the difference between somebody who's in late stages with no teeth left in their head, with sores all over them, skinny as all hell, and think, you know what? This person needs to be taken out of that situation. And if it's somebody walking around who's in the early stages, we still want to offer supports and help and hopefully treatment before it comes to that point. But if you're too dumb to distinguish the differences between those two, just stay out of the issue altogether then. We've always had the means. Every province, every state has a legislation for it. When you get to the point and what is required, when a person is sure to be hurting themselves or others if they're left alone. And how can you pretend for a minute that those people in that condition downtown, or even in the suburbs where they're showing up now and everything, aren't going to hurt themselves at the very least, and very possibly others? And you need protocols. You don't put people in lightly. I understand that. Absolutely. But when we have somebody, again, in that sort of condition on the streets, they are somebody's kids, somebody's cousins, somebody's brothers. Unfortunately, they've lost touch with their families, or their families have given up on them. They have nowhere else to put them. They don't know what to do. It was the stubbornness of my family getting the person who had that breakdown into a hospital and into, again, as I said, he isn't cured. He's still in a facility, but not a long-term one like he would have needed. And if you didn't have those kind of advocates, if we weren't there when he had that breakdown to get him into that hospital, he would have ended up in the streets. A senior citizen with a mental health breakdown on the streets. And it happens all the time. And he would have died. He was in no possible capacity or condition to take care of himself. He would have died out there of exposure or something. So, yeah, I want to get this rant out. It's a policy failure. It's one we don't hear our politicians talking about often because they want to always talk about the fluffy things. The citizens don't want to hear it. People don't like hard truths, but this is one. We need, we always talk about healthcare. We talk about building more hospitals. We talk about building more clinics, dental facilities. We need more nuthouses. We need long-term ones. We need to accept that some of the people we put in will be so incurably out of control, unfortunately, that they may have to spend the rest of their lives in there. But it's better than spending the rest of a short life miserable on the streets. So when we start working in politics, we start lobbying our elected officials. We talk whether I'm a conservative, a libertarian, or whatever. I'm libertarian leaning, but I have that feeling of compassionate conservatism. I feel we have a social obligation to take care of those who can't take care of themselves. And those people on the street can't. Absolutely can't. People who won't take care of themselves, that's a different story altogether. That's where they need more of a kick in the butt. But there's a lot of people who can't. And I think we should do what we can to take care of them. And that means getting over the ick factor of talking about it, getting over the having to face a harsh reality and realize that somebody may be incurable, and trying to set things up at least as humanely as possible, and maybe somebody will come up with a mental health miracle cure that will stabilize people so that we really can release them, not short-term treatments like Thorazine, and we can get there. As long as we keep dodging around these issues, don't be shocked when you keep seeing growing numbers of zombies wandering up and down the streets, strange crimes committed by people not in their right mind on the streets, because the people in Victorian times at least understood you had to house them long term. And today we've become so open-minded, our brains fell out. And we've determined that the humane thing to do for people who have lost control of their mental faculties is to leave them sitting in the streets. So that's just, I had to get that out. Be sure to lobby for that, guys. Just like any other hospitals, we need more of them. We need dedicated ones. And it'll be better for everybody, the people on the streets and the people worried about having to live with the people on the streets.